China and the Northern Nomads, a Chinese world order in the making. From early times to the 19th century, China's many interactions with the larger Eurasian world shaped both China's own development and that of world history more generally. The country's most enduring and intense interaction with foreigners lay to the north, involving the many nomadic pastoral or semi-agricultural peoples of the steppes. Living in areas unable to sustain Chinese-style farming, the northern nomads had long focused their economies around the raising of livestock, such as sheep, cattle, goats, and the mastery of horse riding. Organized locally in small, mobile, kinship-based groups, sometimes called tribes, these peoples also periodically created much larger and powerful states or confederations that could draw on the impressive horsemanship and military skills of virtually the entire male population of their societies. Such specialized pastoral societies needed grain and other agricultural products from China, and their leaders developed a taste for Chinese manufactured and luxury goods, wine and silk, for example, with which they could attract and reward followers. Thus, the nomads were drawn like a magnet toward China, trading, raiding, and extorting to obtain the resources so vital to their way of life. For 2,000 years or more, pressure from the steppes and the intrusion of nomadic peoples were constant factors in China's historical development. From the nomads' point of view, the threat often came from the Chinese, who periodically directed their own military forces deep into the steppes, built the Great Wall to keep the nomads out, and often proved unwilling to allow pastoral peoples easy access to trading opportunities within China. And yet, the Chinese needed the nomads. Their lands were the source of horses, which were essential for the Chinese military. Other products of the steppes and the forest beyond, such as skins, furs, hides, and amber, were also of value in China. Furthermore, pastoral nomads controlled much of the Silk Road trading network, which funneled goods from the West into China. The continuing interaction between China and the northern nomads brought together peoples occupying different environments, practicing different economies, governing themselves with different institutions, and thinking about the world in quite different ways. The tribute system in theory. An enduring outcome of this cross-cultural encounter was a particular view the Chinese held of themselves and of their neighbors, fully articulated by the time of the Han Dynasty and lasting for more than 2 millennia. That understanding cast China as the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, infinitely superior to the barbarian peoples beyond its borders. With its long history, great cities, refined tastes, sophisticated intellectual and artistic achievements, bureaucratic state, literate elite, and prosperous economy, China represented civilization. All of this, in Chinese thinking, was in sharp contrast to the rude cultures and primitive life of the northern nomads, who continually moved about like beasts and birds, lived in tents, ate mostly meat and milk, and practically lived on their horses, while making war on everyone within reach. Educated Chinese saw their own society as self-sufficient, requiring little from the outside world, while barbarians, quite understandably, sought access to China's wealth and wisdom. Furthermore, China was willing to permit that access under controlled conditions, for its sense of superiority did not preclude the possibility that barbarians could become civilized Chinese. China was a radiating civilization, graciously shedding its light most fully to nearby barbarians, and with diminished intensity to those farther away. Such was the general understanding of literate Chinese about their own civilization in relation to northern nomads and other non-Chinese people. That worldview also took shape as a practical system for managing China's relationship with these people. Known as the tribute system, it was a set of practices that required non-Chinese authorities to acknowledge Chinese superiority and their own subordinate place in a Chinese-centered world order. Foreigners seeking access to China had to send a delegation to the Chinese court, where they would perform the kowtow, a series of ritual bowings and prostrations, and present their tribute, products of value from their countries, to the Chinese emperor. In return for these expressions of submission, he would grant permission for foreigners to trade in China's rich markets and would provide them with gifts or bestowals often worth far more than the tribute they had offered. This was the mechanism by which successive Chinese dynasties attempted to regulate their relationships with northern nomads, with neighboring states such as Korea, Vietnam, Tibet, and Japan, and after 1500, with those European barbarians from across the sea. Often, this system seemed to work. Over the centuries, countless foreign delegations proved willing to present their tribute, say the required words, and perform the rituals necessary for gaining access to the material goods of China. Aspiring non-Chinese rulers also gained prestige as they basked in the reflected glory of even this subordinate association with the great Chinese civilization. The official titles, seals of office, and ceremonial robes they received from China proved useful in their local struggles for power. The tribute system in practice. But the tribute system also disguised some realities that contradicted its assumptions. On occasion, China was confronting not separate and small-scale barbarian societies, but large and powerful nomadic empires able to deal with China on at least equal terms. An early nomadic confederacy was that of the Xiongnu, established about the same time as the Han Dynasty and eventually reaching from Manchuria to Central Asia. Devastating Xiongnu raids into northern China persuaded the Chinese emperor to negotiate an arrangement that recognized the nomadic state as a political equal, promised its leader a princess in marriage, and most important, agreed to supply him annually with large quantities of grain, wine, and silk. Although these goods were officially termed gifts, granted in accord with the tribute system, they were in fact tribute in reverse, or even protection money. In return for these goods, so critical for the functioning of the nomadic state, the Xiongnu agreed to refrain from military incursions into China. The basic realities of the situation were summed up in the warning to the Han Dynasty in the 1st century BCE. Just make sure that the silks and grain stuffs you bring the Xiongnu are the right measure and quality. That's all. What's the need for talking? If the goods you deliver are up to measure and good quality, all right. But if there's any deficiency or the quality is no good, then when the autumn harvest comes, we will take our horses and trample all over your crops. Something similar occurred during the Tang Dynasty as a series of Turkic empires arose in Mongolia. Like the Xiongnu, they too extorted large gifts from the Chinese. One of these peoples, the Uyghurs, actually rescued the Tang Dynasty from a serious internal revolt in the 750s. In return, the Uyghurs' leader gained one of the Chinese emperor's daughter as a wife and arranged a highly favorable exchange of poor quality horses for high quality silk, which brought 500,000 rolls of the precious fabric annually into the Uyghur lands. Despite the rhetoric of the tribute system, the Chinese were not always able to dictate the terms of their relationship with the northern nomads. Steppe nomads were generally not much interested in actually conquering and ruling China. It was easier and more profitable to extort goods from a functioning Chinese state. On occasion, however, that state broke down, and various nomadic groups moved in to pick up the pieces, conquering and governing parts of China. Such a process took place following the fall of the Han Dynasty, and again after the collapse of the Tang Dynasty, when the Khitan and then the Jin or Jurchen peoples established states that encompassed parts of northern China, as well as major areas of the steppes to the north. Both of them required the Chinese Song Dynasty, located further south, to deliver annually huge quantities of silk, silver, and tea, some of which found its way into the Silk Road trading network. The practice of bestowing gifts on barbarians, long a part of the tribute system, allowed the proud Chinese to imagine that they were still in control of the situation, even as they were paying heavily for protection from nomadic incursion. Those gifts, in turn, provided vital economic resources to nomadic states. Cultural influence across an ecological frontier. When nomadic peoples actually ruled parts of China, some of them adopted Chinese ways, employing Chinese advisors, governing according to Chinese practice, and at least for the elite, immersing themselves in Chinese culture and learning. This process of becoming Chinese went furthest among the Jurchen, many of whom lived in northern China and learned to speak Chinese, wore Chinese clothing, married Chinese husbands and wives, and practiced Buddhism or Taoism. On the whole, however, Chinese culture had only a modest impact on the nomadic peoples of the northern steppes. Unlike the native peoples of southern China, who were gradually absorbed into Chinese culture, the pastoral societies north of the Great Wall generally retained their own cultural patterns. Few of them were incorporated, at least not for long, within a Chinese state, and most lived in areas where Chinese-style agriculture was simply impossible. Under these conditions, there were few incentives for adopting Chinese culture wholesale. But various modes of interaction, peaceful trade, military conflict, political negotiations, economic extortion, some cultural influence, continued across the ecological frontier that divided two quite distinct and separate ways of life. Each was necessary for the other. On the Chinese side, elements of steppe culture had some influence in those parts of northern China that were periodically conquered and ruled by nomadic peoples. The founders of the Sui and Tang dynasties were in fact of mixed nomad and Chinese ancestry, and came from the borderland region where a blended Chinese Turkic culture had evolved. High-ranking members of the imperial family personally led their troops in battle in the style of Turkic warriors. Furthermore, Tang Dynasty China was awash with foreign visitors from all over Asia, delegations bearing tribute, merchants carrying exotic goods, bands of clerics or religious pilgrims bringing new religions such as Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Manichaeism. For a time in the Tang Dynasty, almost anything associated with Western barbarians, Central Asians, Persians, Indians, Arabs, had great appeal among northern Chinese elites. Their music, dancing, clothing, foods, games, and artistic styles found favor among the upper classes. The more traditional southern Chinese, feeling themselves heir to the legacy of the Han Dynasty, were sharply critical of their northern counterparts for allowing women too much freedom, for drinking yogurt rather than tea, and for listening to Western music, all of which they attributed to barbarian influence. Around 800 CE, the poet Yuan Chen gave voice to a growing backlash against this too easy acceptance of things Western. Ever since the Western horsemen began raising smut and dust, fur and fleece, rank and rancid, have filled Xian and Lo. Women make themselves Western matrons by the study of Western makeup. Entertainers present Western tunes in their devotion to Western music.